afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's Mashreq Sustainability Dialogues podcast, where we take a deeper dive into this massive push that we're seeing towards sustainability, towards climate action, towards ESG across the region, trying to uncover some insights and intelligence for our audience and stakeholders to help navigate their journey ahead. The critical question that we're tackling today is climate capital. How to spur innovations in sustainability essentially across the region. We're joined here by our host, Corey Thompson, Executive Vice President, Head of Digital Retail Banking Group at Mashreq, Akshay Chopra, Vice President, Innovation Design at Visa, Central Europe, Middle East, and Africa, Ivan Jakovljevic, who is the advisor at Hub 71, and Farah Naz, who's Director of ESG and Innovation Middle East and Africa at AECOM. Thank you all for joining today. We appreciate your time. It's very much a critical question that is extremely timely and relevant, especially heading into COP28. We've seen the announcements in terms of implementation and turning the dial. Corey, as our host, I just wanted to first open up with you for your overall comments on essentially the challenge that we're addressing today.
Thank you, Brian, and let me start by saying a warm welcome to our guests. Thank you for joining. This is a topic that is strategically and existentially important to Mashreq. We, as a bank, aspire to play a leading role in our region to drive towards net zero. As a proof point to this, Mashreq has financed over 15 billion of sustainable investments since 2021, and we ourselves have committed to become carbon neutral by 2050. But for our conversation today, and maybe thinking about this from a more human context, our MENA region is home to just shy of about 500 million people, and we expect this to grow by about 50% over through until 2050. So this growth makes the case for a sustainable future for our region all the more compelling. So from my perspective, I'm really excited about the conversation. I'm excited to explore how investment can spur innovation and sustainability, and perhaps more important, what conditions need to be in place to maximize the impact of that investment for us to create a sustainable future for the Middle East. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Corey. Akshay, I just want to bring you in on that. You're no stranger to innovation. I saw that you've been involved in 200 sprints. You know how to move things pretty quickly. What are your overall comments and opening thoughts on the question that we're tackling today?
That's a good place to start, pretty broad. And I would say we're at a point, especially in this region, where as financial institutions, we need to put the power back in the hands of the customer. If it's just the institutions that are trying to drive a sustainable agenda, it won't go very far. But if we are educating the users, empowering them with the tools, the ability to actually make a difference with the day-to-day decisions that they make, that can go a much longer way in building a sustainable future from the ground up. So whether it's through new technology or whether it's through good old customer-centric design on this topic, how do we empower individual micro decisions to become more sustainable? That's what excites me.
Just a follow-up question with that. What do you think are the first steps to enable that empowerment? Where does education come into play to that? Where do you see, if you're going to kind of give a rating at the moment of where we are and then where we have to kind of get to, let's say?
Yeah, look, I think that the very principles it's got to start with is firstly letting people be aware of why it is important for them to make decisions that are more sustainable, more climate friendly, more socially friendly as well. And that can be done through good campaigns. It could be done through financial education. But we as the institutions and even as governments, we need to drive that message that the minimal small choices you make actually add up to make tremendous impacts. So that's the first thing you've got to do. You've got to change some of these mindsets. Then you also got to educate them with actual data, actual information that tells people with the decisions that they make, what kind of impact do they have on the climate, on sustainable development goals in general. And once you've been able to do that, then you can actually put action back into their hands, enable them to do things like get rewarded for more sustainable decisions or offset some of their carbon footprint by donating their reward points or actual cash towards things that they believe in that'll make the world better. So it's really starts with the basics of education, but then through technologies and by coming together as an industry through the right platforms, we can give power back to the consumer to make those actions as well.
Yvonne, I just wanted to also bring you in next. You've been involved in many startups as well from your experience. I think you've been probably bottom up, top down in terms of progressing both sides. What is your opening comments, also taking into consideration what Akshay just said on what we're tackling today?
So yeah, thank you. So I think you've already kind of provided the cue for that. I think we're all about technology here, right? And my background is all about technology. Hub 71 is all about essentially establishing a startup and technology ecosystem out of Abu Dhabi, and technology is part of the, if not the whole answer to sustainability. To give you some idea as to how we're thinking about that, climate tech in particular as a way to kind of reach carbon neutrality, as a way for us to kind of reach some of those sustainability goals, is one of the big focus areas for us at Hub 71. We're actually at this very moment we're incubating 8 different startups that are tackling that very topic from a very different level and from a very different angle. The kinds of things that some of those startups are working on are recapturing carbon from the air, and essentially kind of making the air less more carbon neutral. Rejuvenating our coral reefs is another startup that we're supporting, and the third startup that comes to mind is the one that actually kind of helps understand the heat footprint in urban developments, and thus kind of helps us make appropriate decisions accordingly that are kind of leading us towards this sustainable future. So I think there's probably not going to be any one answer to how we get there, but technology as kind of as something that underpins a bunch of different answers that we need to kind of bring together as a society is something we're very much involved in and something we're very much supporting at Hub 71 and in Abu Dhabi.
And just a follow-up question on that. Technology, without a doubt, is going to be an accelerator to help us get there. But what do you see in terms of the challenges of accelerating, scalability, scaling up? You mentioned carbon capture. Some other markets around the world might be more mature at the moment, but even then it's still in the beginning phases. Where do you see the next steps in terms of scaling from your perspective?
So look, just like any other startup ecosystem, I think the 3 key components are always talent, capital, and market. I think we're very hard at work in kind of making sure that we act as an enabler of all 3. I think it's no secret that our region is probably the most challenged on the talent component. And I think what we're trying to do is basically to become this global sustainability hub where we can actually attract and house talent from all parts of the world to actually kind of help us create those technologies and create those solutions. The second part is the funding, and obviously this region is is typically known for funding, and I think this is it's no difference in this particular area. We're trying to make sure to take all the friction out of the funding process in order to fund the right technologies and the right solutions. And last but not least, as a market, I think what we're trying to do, we're trying to position Abu Dhabi not only as a hub for the Middle East and North Africa region, but even beyond. We believe that because Abu Dhabi is actually one of the global energy capitals, that we not only have the mandate but also the responsibility to lead the way when it comes to reaching those sustainability goals. And that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Farah, I just wanted to bring you in as well. We mentioned technology. Of course, you just co-authored a recent book on the net zero city. Very much involved in the development of smart cities. But just outside of that smart city aspect, because there's so many elements that go into it, what are your opening comments in the overall critical question, not just technology, but the other elements that are very critical that play into this, let's say, journey of acceleration towards climate action?
Thank you for the question. So just to take a step back, cities consume 3% of the global land area and are responsible for 80% of global emission. And with the population rise globally in this part of the world, cities are the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emission for different sectors. Now, UAE has announced a 2050 net zero target and initiative, and globally 240 cities have announced it as well, but only 60 cities globally have actually pledged and have an action plan. So the whole definition of smart cities have evolved in the last few years to a climate smart cities, and it brings in all the points that the other speakers are talking about: climate finance, climate tech, and how do you define these two things together to create a truly climate smart cities. So technology is very important, innovation is important, but innovation at scale, technology at scale, bringing the technical innovation, business innovation, social value, that's highly important, because at the end of the day, we are deploying technology and innovation to serve people. So when we are looking at climate smart cities, yes, of course, all the technologies and innovation is coming together to create that story. But at the end of the day, what matters is how we make young children more healthier, or how do we feel, all of us feel healthier, equitable, sustainable future. So it all comes together as a storyline, but I do agree with Akshay's point about the training. Advocacy is highly important, because everything is very technical and it has a technical journey, but nothing is linear. It's a multidimensional world, and we all know that every technological decision has a social impact, a business impact, and an environmental impact. So connecting these dots together, that's part of work I do. And what I wrote about my book on Net Zero City is how do you think about innovation from a master planning, innovation at scale to deploy. And one other point I will say is that proof of concept is really important. So really learning fast, furiously to understand where does it fail, where does it work. And just because a technology of a proof of concept worked in Honduras doesn't mean it's going to work for us. So finding that, identifying that feedback loop and deploying that technology for the people is very, very important for the decarbonization. And I think that's key part of all of us, what we are talking about towards the decarbonization journey of UAE, specifically to meet the 2050 net zero agenda.
And this might be a broader question as a follow-up. A lot in terms of scaling up and deploying finance is ensuring that the right ecosystem is
Correct.
around in order to deploy that. In terms of smart cities, net zero cities, what is the overall approach with that concept? In the sense, if you look at Saudi Arabia, you have Riyadh, which has a legacy city, which has already infrastructure in place. It's a dense city, and it's really much about deploying legacy infrastructure, or sorry, technology into legacy infrastructure in order to make it more sustainable. And then very close, you have Neom, which is completely different.
Yes.
So what is the overall strategy? What is the outlook when you have all these elements that are going on in terms of the aspects that need to be looked at when creating those ecosystems that enable finance and investments?
So a systems thinking approach specific to the context is very important. So for existing city, which is already functioning for last few years, the technology deployment and the optimization towards a climate smart city or towards net zero transition is completely different, because how the city will evolve with the integration of different technology or solutions. Whichever way the solution will enter the city or the people's life. But for a new city, it's completely a different way of approaching. Initially, from a very engineering point of view, we approach it towards looking at the embodied carbon of the materials that we're putting in, and then what's the operational carbon. That's a very easy way of looking at, because carbon is something that you can count. So deploying net zero strategies from a policy level, having the business plan for implementation, and then integration of those policies and technology for city, it works in a different way based on the climate or the age of the city, and also the market readiness. That's extremely important. Currently, in UAE government I'm leading this initiative where we're gonna release a survey for net zero readiness, a market survey for 7 Emirates. And the idea of the net zero readiness market survey is to understand where the market is and how does the market see going forward. And these kind of surveys and data is extremely important, because once we know the market readiness, then we can do the investment modeling, both from a technology side and phasing investment depending on what exactly the city needs for its growth.
Thank you, Farah. Akshay, just kind of moving on to the next point is you mentioned consumer empowerment. What are, specifically the innovation, the investment opportunities that you see that exist at the moment that we need to specifically scale up in order to help accelerate that empowerment?
Absolutely. Look, the first thing I would say is customer empowerment isn't just good to have, it actually makes for good business. So 71% of customers would actually choose a bank that has more to offer by way of sustainability. So it actually drives customer choice. In the world of payment, it drives what we call top of wallet preference as well. So if there's any perceptions that no, this is just something we're doing only for social good and the environment, no, this is something that will help your business as a financial institution. And what you can do is, we look at it in a framework that we call educate, engage, and empower. So education, as we talked about, is telling them both about, the overall value of their actions when it comes to sustainability, but also educating them about the impact they're having through things like carbon footprint calculators and so on. Engagement is when it takes it to another level. So not only do you know the impact you're having, but we can actually gamify, or we can actually reward socially or environmentally responsive behaviors through benefits and loyalty when it comes to sustainable behaviors. And the last is empowerment. So empowerment can come in terms of how do you enable customers to not just track, but offset their carbon footprint? How do you enable them to make easy donations to causes, both environmental and social, that they think are going to make the world a better place overall? So educate, engage, and empower is the framework we like to think of it as. We actually built a entire bundle called the Visa Sustainable Eco Benefits Bundle, which a lot of these partners enabling these kind of benefits and value adds. And we're seeing a lot of uptake from it. So as I said, it's important to educate, engage, and empower. And it's also not just a good thing for society, but a good thing for business.
And where does the regulatory environment come into play? Not so much the regulatory environment, but the environment that enables that. Very much in a lot that we're seeing across, not just the region, but the world is industry driven. But you cover a very mass region, right? Central Europe, Middle East, Africa. What are you seeing in terms of best practices that help enable those key elements that you just described?
That's a great question. So in the 90 plus countries that I serve, I can't pick a single country where the attitude towards sustainability is that it's not important. For every single market, it is important. For every single government, it is a stated priority. Now, the level to which they are active is, of course, different. Where we are in the UAE, for example, it's incredibly important. COP28 will be here. It's something that the government is pursuing at the highest levels. And so we see that play out in the way the regulator supports all these agendas. But there is no country where the regulator is anti it or even indifferent for that matter. Everyone is supporting it. Where there is a huge difference, however, is how the institutions, not just financial, but how the corporates think about sustainability. In some markets, it's very pro-sustainability. They think of it as a core business priority, whereas in other markets, they just think of it as a good to have, which is unfortunate because regardless, like if you look at all the research that's been done, and I'm sure Farah has done some of this herself, you will see that by and large, when organizations invest in sustainability, they deliver outsized returns. They deliver above average returns. And the S&P 500 is a great example. I also told you about how it drives customer choice. So 71% in the banking sector would prefer a bank that does more for sustainability. And even among banks, like if we look at a global average, we see 87% of banks are already building value propositions or even products aligned to sustainability. But of course, there's in the region I serve, there's huge disparity in terms of how seriously it's taken. So I would say the regulators are generally very supportive to highly supportive. but it's the institutions that are a bit inconsistent, and I hope more of them see the business value as well as the environmental value.
Brian,
Yvonne,
maybe if I could
Go ahead,
just jump on Akshay's point, a couple of points that were quite interesting there. So in terms of the perspective of the importance for financial institutions, certainly Mashreq believe that. This is why we make the commitments we do. Not just that it makes business sense and good business sense, but that it's important for the communities that we serve as well. So I work in the retail bank. We're dealing with consumers, retail customers. And so you think about, if we're seeing an increase in the awareness, which I think is generally the temperature, in the marketplace, then how do we make that tangible for the user? How do you move that to something that awareness is not a broad, fuzzy thing, but a specific thing for them to be able to then, understand, develop some level of urgency, and then actually take action on as well. So, there are a range of things that Mashreq are looking. There are obviously a lot of solutions in the marketplace that are doing this, but from a consumer standpoint, moving beyond sort of a fuzzy thing to something quite specific that they can take action on. Now, that could be something offsetting in nature, but I think long term, you want to drive better choices at the root and at the source, and actually inform the customer to be able to start making better choices and support them on that journey so they can make those as well. So there are a couple of interesting trends that we're seeing.
Can I add one more point on this? For a long time, people thought that climate is something that climate scientists need to resolve, and it's not my responsibility, it doesn't matter. But if you follow the news, there are natural forest fires in Canada, and the breathing of entire US and other countries are affected, especially vulnerable population and young children. So what we are seeing now is that we all live in one world, and it's about taking ownership. So the businesses that understand the value are really taking their steps. Now, change is something nobody likes, especially changing something that makes your risk profile higher. Return of investment might be questionable, is something not a comfort zone. So taking that mindset shift is a big journey, and I think it's for all of us together, we are in it. So it is a bit slow, but it will take time. But I think it's slow steps that will lead to that, because currently what's happening in the world is showing that one country's impact can affect the breathing of another country's children's and others. So I think, yes, it is very slow, but these are the conversations that are very important people come together and raise that awareness and create that advocacy piece.
Well, I just have a follow-up question to that as well, is in terms of talking about a stable environment in a situation that's ever changing, right? Climate action's always changing. Everyone's trying to progress in different journeys. Where do you see specific aspects, and coming from your aspect as an ESG director, where do standards come into play? Align standards that will help create that stable environment where everyone's aligned. From your aspect of covering ESG can have many different definitions, but in terms of creating an environment that's, I would say, would help drive more financing and funding, where do standards come into play? And how do you align?
Standards play a very important role. An example that I would use that recently UK government published a carbon standard for design and operation carbon, and globally that's the biggest standard that ever been done. It's past 2080, and the idea is the global uptake of that. Now, what it showed is they've been working on this for quite a bit of time, 5-6 years, and finally a consensus was reached about a standard that globally people would be accepting it. This is a very positive side. On the ESG side, currently there are lots of different standards, and everybody can pick and choose the definition. Even the definition of net zero is not that clearly defined. So that definition also has some, what do you mean by net zero? But coming to the standards, yes, that will play a really important part. But I think it's a journey all of us have to take together to standardize that ESG approach. Currently, there's lots of different standards out there. Anybody who follows any standard is doing something that's better than nothing. I'm a climate optimist, so I would say that. But yes, what we would like to reach is a consensus of standards globally, so everybody has an equal take, equitably progressing forward. And I think anybody would say that that's the intention, and hopefully that will happen pretty soon.
Thank you, Farah. Yvonne, I just want to bring you back in. Talking on specific aspects. Of course, each country is moving along, progressing. Everyone's doing something. They can always accelerate it more. But where do we switch in terms of visions and announcements to strategies that are laid out in terms of blueprints, and how has that impacted innovation in sustainability funding and innovation from your side in terms of driving some of these startups?
Yeah, so look, I think it's no secret that a lot of things, especially in this region, are kind of coming from a top-down perspective, right? And I think the very important thing from a sustainability point of view and from an innovation point of view is that there have been very strong signals coming all the way from the top leadership of not only this country but also other countries in the region. I think you mentioned Saudi Arabia, which I think is kind of moving quite fast in this regard. That both innovation and sustainability are extremely important, right? And then these announcements then basically get followed through with changes in regulations and then the allocation of specific resources. I think the one thing that is also important, I think, kind of building also on the last thing that both Corey and Farah have mentioned around standards, and I think also the KPIs and the incentives, right, which are very important, because that there's all business adage that what doesn't get measured doesn't get improved, right? I think that is one of the things that we actually struggle with, or have been struggling with historically quite a bit when it comes to sustainability, because most of the things that are now kind of an issue when it comes to sustainability have been classified as externalities, right? They were not measured, they were not taken into account kind of from an incentive point of view, and now more than ever, now we're seeing the actual impact that they have on our everyday lives. I think some of the things about kind of trying to quantify those externalities and kind of trying to put together the right incentives into play for the businesses, for the organizations to actually adhere to those will actually come a long way. And there are two kind of recent examples here from the region that I think are also kind of making me halfway optimistic as Farah is, I guess, kind of from a sustainability point of view. And this is these are the carbon exchanges, right? They have been set up both here in the UAE as well as in Saudi. Air Carbon Exchange is one of those Hub 71 startups that has actually been graduated and has been invested in by Mubadala, the sovereign wealth fund of the UAE, with an idea to set up the the carbon exchange for the emerging markets here in Abu Dhabi, here in the UAE. Similar announcement came from Saudi Arabia, again with this kind of idea that we need to kind of put the two and two together. We need to align those incentives in order to make sure that the behaviors of both individuals or businesses are adhering to kind of our long-term goals, which are related to sustainability.
Can I maybe just have a question for Ivan and possibly for Farah as well? Just picking up on some of the points that you make from thinking about the nature of the problem, which requires long-term commitments, long-term sustained, endurance, if you like, and then the nature of innovation, which is a lot of startups, often short-term, not necessarily focused, but short life cycles, because you're inventing and some things work and some things don't. How do you see these things working themselves out? What's the equilibrium here as we're looking for innovation to spur or investment to spur innovation, which, both from a capital perspective, you need a different mindset because the payback's different, the profile of the investment's different, the nature of the order of magnitude of the task at hand is different from the machinery or the typical working life cycle of a startup. How do you see those things working themselves out to solve this problem?
That's an interesting question, and it's an interesting challenge as well. But I wouldn't limit it only to startups. I think you could also make a similar argument when it comes to large publicly traded companies, that a lot of their decisions are kind of based on the quarterly cycles of quarterly reportings to the Wall Street, right? So I think as a society, we are driven more towards the short-term incentives than the long-term incentives. I think bringing it back to the startup point and also kind of bringing it back to here to this region here. I think we're lucky to be living in a region and in a society where a lot of these things are kind of coming together, right? Because we've spoken about the top-down decisions, which are very kind of long-termistic, right? If you think about, the Plan 2071 in the UAE or the Vision 2030 in Saudi and beyond, these are long-term plans that are geared towards transforming societies and including tackling some of those kind of long-term problems, right? And from these grand visions, a lot of resource allocation kind of trickles down into specific areas, right? So again, from the Abu Dhabi perspective and from the COP71 perspective, sustainability and climate tech have been identified as one of the things that we actually have a specific focus on, even though if you look at it kind of from a pure commercial point of view, sustainability and climate tech are actually not within the top 10 areas that the venture funding in this region has actually gone to. Right. So from a commercial point of view, this has been a challenge, but it has been a recognition of its long-termistic impact and importance that has kind of driven us towards putting it as one of the key areas of focus when it comes to innovation in a particular technology area.
I'll just add one more point to that, and thank you for the question, Corey. I think a clearly defined strategic objective is important. So if we take UAE's net zero commitment as a clearly defined strategic objective, then if we look at UAE's innovation strategy, it talks about 7 key sectors, and one of the key sectors renewable, and the other one is transport, I believe. So if we just zoom in a funneling to, okay, in renewables, what can we do for existing building stock and new building stock? I think the first key objective is demand reduction. So hence your question about startups are short and sweet and they're testing different ideas, but then net zero is a long-term objective. I think what's essentially required is an action plan of what the 3, 6, 9 years goal would be, and then finding different solutions and doing a proof of concept. I think the biggest challenge globally, and especially UK and other countries face, is that their policies have not been adopted. But we live in a country, it's a very agile. So if for example, a net zero policy is implemented, startups start doing proof of concepts, market readiness, and we realize in 6 to 9 months' time, if we deployed 6 technologies, 3 works and 3 doesn't, we move ahead with those 3. I think that agileness of policy, funding, and then going forward and deploying it, that's so important. So then a proof of concept of, 10 buildings becomes 10,000 buildings. And I think that's the mindset of that agility of these 3 sectors coming together. And if you ask me what's needed for this, 2 mindsets. One is collaboration is not enough. We need to co-create together. That's the whole science. We need to co-create and really have a clear business plan of the deployment, implementation, and return of investment. And from a very engineering perspective, return of investment should not be just linear on the finance. It should have a value of social aspects as well as technical aspects, because technology is something we can constantly improve. But the social benefit of a deployment of a technology in a market, we might find that the social benefit is immense. It's really creating an amazing effect and creating new business sectors. So I think that business value creation from a social value, technical value, and business value, and layering it, we'll find that it becomes a really interesting process to move on, and a deployment model. It's not linear. Of course, it will have risks, but it's an agile approach mostly.
Akshay, would you like to share your comments as well on that question?
100%. And I think you guys brought up a really critical aspect of this, which is working with startups, right? And Corey, thanks for teeing off this discussion, because I believe 2 things about sustainability, if we, especially as the larger FIs, are to get this right. The first is we cannot go at it alone, right? Much like nature itself, like we have to work with ecosystems. So, Corey, Mashreq, you guys are doing a great job building that ecosystem of partners, which will help you in the sustainability agenda over here. And we also believe that, and in the innovation center, like as you said, Farah, co-creation is literally the thing that we do. So this co-creative, collaborative, ecosystem-driven approach is really important if we are to get sustainability right. Most of us will not be able to succeed if we make this a solo initiative. And the second thing, as a corollary to that, is especially for us larger institutions, we have to work with startups that specialize in sustainability services and do one or two things really well that we can plug into a broader sustainability strategy or proposition. And to give you a few examples, of how important that is to our strategy. So globally, we have a tie-up with Ecolytic, with which we offer a sustainability as a service. So they're a global partner of ours. We also work with the likes of Plan A, again, a global player. We have local partners like a fintech called Phils, which is a UAE-based one, which is on a Fintech Partner Connect program. And interestingly, we had this startup competition called Visa Everywhere Initiative, where tens of thousands of startups around the world apply. And the winner this year globally was a sustainable startup from Nigeria called Thrive Agric. So not just like Visa, but like a lot of our ecosystem partners who are in these decisions vote with their feet and say, no, we are interested in startups that can solve sustainability challenges, because it makes it much easier for folks like us to move forward faster and play a role in this space that's substantial. So thanks for bringing up this topic and what my co-panelists have shared, because a lot of this, whether they like it or not, the burden rests on the startups, and we have to partner with them effectively.
Akshay, essential foundation to whether it's a startup or a large corporation or whether it's technology, energy, finance is talent. We've had this conversation across multiple sectors. Everyone is looking to establish that talent, especially in the area of sustainability. What is your thoughts on that aspect, your outlook, and really the focus on what stakeholders should be doing moving forward to attract that talent?
Look, a couple of things. What I've generally found is sustainability talent is not as opportunistic and mercenary in its nature as many of other forms of talent. They won't just go after something for the money or for the title. They want purpose, both from a personal satisfaction perspective, but also people can in the sustainability circles can see through greenwashing very quickly. So if you are able to build not just a good tagline, but a very compelling sustainability purpose, something that you really work towards, that's an important first step. And so that would be my starting point. But if we look at this region and this market in particular, I actually think we can be a massive magnet for sustainability talent. And for a similar reason to why we can be a massive talent magnet for all sorts of talent in the UAE, because you've seen the government is supporting new skills, innovative skills, technical skills at scale. We've got golden visa programs. We've got all sorts of ways where right down from the rulers, they're saying that we want the best talent in the world to flock to this country. So I think the situation is set. The ground has been laid by our governments, our regulators, to attract the best talents, give them a good infrastructure that they need. Now it's on us to make sure that we build a clear and consistent sustainability purpose that attracts the talent.
Unfortunately, 30 minutes, I think we're at 35 minutes, goes by pretty quickly. I just wanted to do a quick round, quick sound bite from each speaker to get your closing comments, 1 minute, less than 1 minute, actually, a few seconds. We have COP28 coming up. Everything's towards implementation. The global stock takes taking place. You're seeing, of course, with His Excellency Sultan Al Jaber, making sure everyone's driving, forward. Yvonne, just starting with you, what are you looking for in terms of what's going to turn the dial over the next months leading into COP28, and what's your outlook?
Yeah, look, I think just like in everything else, I think we have huge ambitions, right? I think one of the ambitions, kind of from a technology and startup point of view, is to make this region and UAE specifically one of the global hubs of sustainability, right? When it comes to technology, when it comes to innovation, a lot of the work that we do is in this regard. Some of that work is short-termistic, so we're obviously trying to kind of build based on the awareness and and then the highlights that we're getting through COP, but a lot of it obviously is very, very long-termistic. Going back to the point of talent, that is the key area that we are working on. But talent also kind of needs not only opportunities, they also need the quality of life. They also need the adequate cost structure, and we're working very hard in order to attract the right talent that would actually make UAE one of the global hubs for sustainability when it comes to technology.
Thank you, Yvonne. Farah, I'd like to open up with you again with your closing comments.
For me, driving climate excellence through actionable, practical actions that creates and leaves a truly positive legacy, a lasting legacy, is very important. COP is just the beginning, and I see that as a catalyst of a lot of things UAE is doing, coming together. And my vision to see is that then taking those 3 weeks of work and getting into practical solutions, really pushing it forward. I think that would be amazing. And hopefully that should be what we would expect from COP28.
So constantly moving from 30,000 feet in the air down to sea level.
Exactly, all scales.
Akshay, as well, your quick closing comments?
Yeah, look, I think very similar to Farah, and a bit of a cheeky answer, but I'll go for it anyway. A lot of when I talk to people about COP28, I see them think of this as, oh, we got to get ready for COP28. We got to have something in place by COP28. But look, COP28 is just the starting point. That's when the announcements, the investments, that's when they'll be made. And the real action will happen after COP28. So I would just say, position yourself, build the right infrastructure, hire the right talent, so that the opportunities that come from COP28, you're able to seize effectively.
Corey, I'd like to bring you back in as our host, and I will leave it to you to give the final closing comments.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you again to our host for a very engaging conversation. This is a topic that every time I engage with it, I learn something new, and you know, there's a different perspective brought in, and this has certainly been the case here. I walk away from this very optimistic with an amazing array of experts in the room here. From a Mashreq lens, this is, as we open with, something we're very committed to. Mashreq is a bank that's very action-oriented, particularly when it comes to the tech side or the digital side. We plan to continue our commitment to this path through the second half of this year, through COP28 and onwards. And from a consumer standpoint, you know, our ambition is to help our consumers to be more informed about the decisions that they make on the sustainability and the environmental impact of those decisions that they make. So thank you again. It's been a very engaging and informative conversation, folks.
And from my side, again, thank you, Akshay, Yvonne, Farah, and of course our host, Corey from Mashreq, for your great insights and intelligence shared today. For all those listening, feel free to follow each of our speakers on social media for their updates throughout the year. We hope to have them back on the series again soon. And of course, Mashreq, where we will be publishing this podcast and content harvested from it. But thank you all very much for your time.